Hello everyone, this is Paul the Oaken Knight coming to you with something kind of cool today. See, this morning I had a very special delivery come to my door. And this would be Worthington's fourth offering in its old school game line featuring various battles from the American Civil War. And this one, of course, is the great granddaddy of all of them, Gettysburg 1863. Today I'm going to go ahead and just do a quick unboxing because actually I have another project that I was planning to put out before this one, since I didn't know this was really coming. And you can see I've got my second level on my table, so what I had been doing before is underneath, and I'm actually using what I constructed to make this video and squeeze it out before the other one I was working on. The first thing that strikes me about the game is the actual box art. It's just amazingly cool. Now, one thing you got to know that when this comes in its shrink wrap, this is actually an outer sleeve that you're looking at. The actual box is inside of this thing, so if you do what I usually do and take an X-Acto knife and start carving around it to get the cellophane off of the box, you might damage this thing. So first thing you need to know is be careful, don't damage the sleeve. It's really cool, and you certainly don't want to do any harm to it. The painting on the cover of the box makes me think of the cyclorama, Gettysburg cyclorama, although I took a look at the Gettysburg cyclorama and I wasn't able to locate this image within it. So I don't know if this is original artwork or just what it is, but it's gorgeous. I mean, it's just lovely, and it's absolutely appropriate for a Battle of Gettysburg box to have something like this on it. The reverse of the box gives you some idea of what's inside, and it is very much in line with all the others in the series. Although the map art is slightly different, but as you'll see, it's very nicely done. The counters are great big honking 3/4 inch counters, so that fumbly fingered old guys like me will not have any trouble dealing with this. They list the complexity as 4 out of 10. That sounds about right compared to the other games in the series. And it says victory of 2 to 12 hours. Again, that's going to depend entirely on how quickly you play and which of the scenarios that you're going to be diving into. So me, I tend to play a little slower, so it might take me, say, 20. Okay. Turns are hourly, so this is not going to be like a terrible Swift sword with 20-minute turns and tons of little units and tons of strength markers and all the other paraphernalia. This is boiled down to its essence, as we shall see. And having removed the sleeve from this rather deep 3-inch box, you see that the inner box is the same as the sleeve, same artwork, very, very nicely done. The main function of the sleeve is to keep the box from getting shelf marks, and I think it should do a pretty good job of that. The only parts that are exposed are the ends, but that's not a whole lot. All right, let's pop the top, see what we got. And as a special treat, we see that the underside of the box lid has a continuation of the box art, or actually they're zooming in on this artillery piece here that seems to be in rather desperate straits. Very nicely done. Looking at the first thing we see is the series rules, and I noticed that we're up to version 1.4. So this is a new rule book, which I assume that they're going to put up on their website at some point, so you can download this. However, they do include 2 copies of it, so meet the second copy, same as the first copy, so that you and your buddy can each have a copy of the rules. And as with the other games in the series, the rules are 8 pages long, so this is not something that you're going to spend a week trying to figure out. You will be playing this game probably the same day that you digest these rules. And to make it even easier, if you're familiar with the system, they put the changes in green, so as they've done with other iterations of the book. So finding the differences, if you're up to speed with the book, finding the differences should not be that bad. Also, if you look in the designer's notes that appear in the Playbook, Grant Wiley, the designer, went ahead and put in his designer's notes, talked about some of the differences between the rules and why they made the changes that they did. Since I went ahead and did that whole playthrough on Shiloh, I can tell you that this game isn't going to play a whole lot differently. I'll just mention a couple of the things I see in this book that stand out for me. Probably the biggest thing is if you look in the sequence of play, you're going to see that there is a melee phase. I remember in the very first iteration of this series back with the Antietam game, with the first version of the rule book, I wrote to Grant and I said, hey, why don't you have a melee phase in the game? This game is based loosely on the system used in the original Terrible Swift Sword. It has a very similar sequence of play. That became Great Battles of the American Civil War. That became Phoenix Enterprise's High Tide of the Confederacy, a brigade level adaptation, and now a much nicer brigade adaptation of those rules. And all of them had a melee phase. Well, for the first time, and since this is in the base rules for the system, melee will appear in all the games. And it's actually fairly simply done. Basically, it falls right in with the regular combat. Melee is simply one unit on one unit. The attacker, after the offensive fire phase, will go ahead and declare a melee. The defender gets to shoot with a one shift to the right to make it a stronger shot. If the attacker's still there, he gets to shoot. If the defender breaks and runs, then he captures the hex. That is the melee rule. Now, the previous versions of the game, the Phoenix Enterprise, it was much bloodier because it could go multiple rounds, if I remember right, and I think I do. Units would just kind of blow up. This is not going to be that bad. But if you have already beaten up a unit and it's not that strong and its morale is low and so forth, it's a way to push them out of the hex more quickly. You don't have to wait another hour. Remember, turns are 1 hour long. You don't have to wait that hour to give it another go. And let's see, I did see that there was a panic rule. What that's about is that whenever a unit routes, you put a panic marker in that hex, and then any units that are adjacent to that hex that have to check morale do it at a 1 pip detriment. And these can stack up to 2 pips, so if you have a couple units by them route away, they will have a harder time passing their morale check than they otherwise would. Once units are shaken and they're on the reverse side, their low morale side, then they can get fragile, and this would make them even more fragile. And there are other things, but those are, I think, the two main things. They've always had a breastworks rule, but this time they really have the breastwork counters in there. So you're going to see that clearly breastworks are going to be part of this, as they were in the battle itself. Other than that, it's not that different. It's not that different. A lot of these green highlights are referring to changes that were probably prior to version. I think 1.3b was the previous one. So it's not going to be that hard, if you're familiar with the system, to come up to speed with this pretty quickly. And since we got 2 copies of the rules, we get 2 copies of the playbook, which is where all the scenario information is, any scenario-specific rules, designer's notes, stuff like that. Taking a look at the playbook, there's really not a lot of scenario-specific rules, of course victory and stuff like that, but what you see is, first there is an optional cavalry battle that can happen. This is, the historical battle that was, I believe, east of town. And there is a special player aid card where units go on to have their cavalry battle. No hexagon, so it's a simplified version of the game, and they discuss here how that operates. I assume that it is entirely optional. Honestly, I don't think I've ever played a Gettysburg game where I actually played that. If you think of A Most Fearful Sacrifice, they don't even include any Confederate cavalry units in the game. The only Union cavalry is Buford, and he's just there for the first day, and then he packs up and leaves the morning of the second day. All right, just looking at the scenarios, we have the meeting engagement July 1st. Scenario 2 is the fight for the flanks on the second day of the battle. Okay. Scenario 3 is the fight for Little Round Top, so we're going to just zoom over to the Union right flank on this one. July 3rd, Lee's Folly, of course, the day 3 scenario. They also include a scenario for a possible day 4 battle, so if you didn't get enough in the first 3 days, you can tack this on the end of the campaign or just play a July 4th scenario all by itself. And finally, of course, the one that I'm going to play, because I'm just that kind of guy, is the scenario 6, July 1st through 3rd, with you can optionally tack on the prior scenario, which would extend play to July 4th. One of the things that Grant explains in his designer's notes is that he doesn't like scenarios that only play on part of the maps. All of the scenarios use the complete map. so you can see the effect of what you're doing on other parts of the battlefield. I presume that means that you could go ahead and expand the conflict to be something more like full-on engagement up and down the map, but that option is yours if you want to do it. Moving past the playbook, we see this is the Cavalry battle board. Remember I mentioned there's an option rule for the Cavalry battle using an abstract version of the rules, and so instead of a map with hexagons, it's using this to conduct the cavalry battle on. Use it or don't use it, it's optional. And keeping in the spirit of giving you 2 copies of everything, this is the combat charts, morale charts, movement factors, all the same that I can tell with all of the prior versions of the game. And on the reverse, we have the terrain effects card. And typically what I will do, I will have one, since they give me 2, I'll have one showing the terrain effects and the other showing the CRT and play the game in that manner. And then we have the reinforcement schedule and casualty tracks. One of the things about this game, in all the games in this series, is that you are keeping track of hits on units every time. So if a unit takes 2 hits, you have to mark it underneath the unit with the appropriate strength, and then you have to account for it on game tracks. It has to do with victory points. So casualties incurred are part of the victory points that are going to be awarded to the side that went ahead and inflicted those hits. Anyway, this is the reinforcement card for the Union. Nothing on the reverse side of either of these. This is the reinforcement card for the Confederates. The game itself is brigade level, okay, as was the High Tide of the Confederacy. So if you think about it, you have Terrible Swift Sword on one end of the scale and games like it that are regimental scale. Those games typically have half-inch counters. They typically have a counter for every regiment that was in the battle, a whole bunch of them. A brigade might have 5 regiments, and so you're going to have 5 combat counters. Each one is going to have a certain number of strength points, and they're going to take casualties, usually in increments of 100 men. A Most Fearful Sacrifice went a different way. It went to demi-brigades, which is in between brigade and regiment. There was no such thing as a demi-brigade, not really, in the Civil War. You had brigades that were made up of regiments. A scaling factor for the game. It works wonderfully for large-scale battles. I love the demi-brigade idea. It really works. Now this one, it is a brigade-level game. You get around all that. And this might be just in the Kickstarter version, rather than the version that was that's being sold at retail. You get the org charts for the 2 sides. So you have one for the Confederate showing where everything is. Everything's color-coded. Everything's got the names of the guys on there. Once you figure out how they show brigade names, division names, corps, and so forth, this is an optional thing. It's nice, especially when you get started, especially if you are not familiar with the Battle of Gettysburg, but it's not required, which is why it's just for the Kickstarter people as an extra little thank you for funding them up front. Here's the Union, as you might expect. The game does include leaders, and as you see, the brigade, so here's a brigade. Oops. There's a brigade. It's got the name of the brigade commander on it. If it's got a horse and 1 star, that is the division commander. 2 stars is corps, and 3 stars is army. We're going to have a lot of leaders on the map. You know, the roots of this game go all the way back to the 70s. So that's just how it is. One of the innovations in A Most Fearful Sacrifice is that there are no leader counters. So take your pick. Let's go through the counters. Speaking of counters. Okay, these just have a name, and I forget what it is. I think it begins with a P. These are named after the guy that first put them out in the game world. These are your strength counters. Each counter can have as 8 settings, and you have 3 different counters going up to 24 points of strength. So here's the 1 to 8s, here's the 9 to 16s, and over here, 17 through 24. Fired markers for artillery. When artillery shoots, they have an artillery shooting phase. towards the beginning of the turn, and you mark your unit fired, and then it can't move. And see, dismounted. Markers for cavalry who are fighting dismounted. I think of Buford. Nice big honking breastwork counters, column counters. Each side has 3 what they call tide of battle counters. I believe this is a reroll. So basically, each game day, you're going to have, each side will have 3 of these, and it gives them, each one gives them a reroll. And I think that was in the last set of rules, and they just kind of embellished it a little bit more here with a counter that you will get back again at the end of the game day and can use as you see fit. Here's the panic markers. Remember, I mentioned those. When a guy routs, this goes on the board where he was, and other guys next to him get +1 on their morale checks, which is bad. Here's the strength markers for the tracks that track casualties. That's for the Union. I'm sure somewhere, oh, here on the other side, we got Confederates. So that's what we got. Here's the Union Army. It all fits on one sheet. And oh, by the way, these are all individually mounted on their sprue with rounded corners. You are not going to have yourself a construction project when you punch these out. All of these are going to punch right out, and you're going to be able to use them immediately. I'm a guy who likes to, I like to go ahead and clip my counters. I've got the Oregon Laminations corner clippers. They do a superb job, but when it's like this, I don't have to do that. If you got a game with like 2,000 counters or something, it's quite a job. Trust me on that. This, you got no problems getting these counters on the map very quickly. And the Confederates, smaller army, fewer counters. And here's out of command counters. So you are, the leaders have a command radius, and their units have to be within their command radius, or they are out of command, with suitable rules for being out of command. Next, we see the map. I'm going to go ahead and take that right out of here and set it up on the table rather than have you watch me wrestle with it for the next few minutes. I'm going to take it out and lay it down right down on the table here. And here we go. This is the map all spread out on the table. Note that it is beautifully mounted. It's very solid, just as the other installments in this series. I think the color palette is a little bit different, a little more yellowish brown rather than tannish brown, but it still does a great job. Using more of a tan base for the map, I think that makes the wood stand out very clearly. So even though this was the beginning of July, where everything is pretty much going to be green, well, we're seeing a little bit different version of it, and I think it works fine because it makes the other terrain pop out so that you can see it very easily. I see that we have both secondary and primary roads, so it's going to have fast moving on the improved roads and normal movement on the secondary roads. And let's see over here, we can see Culp's Hill, Cemetery Hill, and Cemetery Ridge running around to the round tops. Am I on camera there? Yes, barely. Devil's Den, Little Round Top, Cemetery Ridge, Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill. Over here, Seminary Ridge. Behind that, we have the Pitzer Farm. And we go over to McPherson's Ridge. Remember, there is no fear in McPherson. So we can try to pronunciate it right. Let's see. Hare's Ridge, where the battle really got started to get going with Buford's cavalry. And I see we have the road for Longstreet's march over to the right side of the battlefield. It includes the intersection. If you look at the map for A Most Fearful Sacrifice, it cuts it off about here, I think. So it's not on there. I'll talk about that in my next video when I focus on A Most Fearful Sacrifice. Here it shows it. So you get the road intersection where where Longstreet moved about here, went up, and then said, oh, they can see me, and doubled back and went another way, costing him way too much time. Let's see. As far as the map itself, it is twice the size of other maps in the series. It's 2 full-size maps in and of itself. So this is a big honkin' map. And then about 3 weeks after they put this up, or maybe it was just a little bit longer, they put up a second Kickstarter for a neoprene version of the map. Now that's not out yet, but I did order that. I do like me neoprene maps. As a general rule, I like them because when I'm making videos, neoprene doesn't have any glare. Now, look at this thing. It's got a kind of a beautiful matte finish. This does not have anything changing it. There's nothing on top of this, nothing to kill glare, and it really is not showing any glare. This is amazing. So maybe I didn't need the neoprene map, but I like them. So when that comes, I will show that to you as well. And then I will probably do some kind of playthrough too, because it's Gettysburg, I just have to. Some kind of playthrough, probably with the neoprene map, although this one is good enough to go ahead and film on, I do have to say. And then at the bottom of the box, you see something that you rarely see in any game these days, that used to be more or less standard back to the old Victory Games days. You get a counter tray to put all your counters in to keep them all nicely sorted, and so that you do not need to use baggies. Wow, that's a treat. And I see the counter tray has a nice lip on it so that it's not going to be falling off inside of the game box. It's actually a useful counter tray, unlike some counter trays from some other publishers that there's almost nothing holding the top of the counter tray on. Alrighty, so that is what's inside the box. My just general reaction is that this is going to be a player's game, just like the other games in the series. It's a game that you're not going to have to spend a week trying to figure out and punching out counters and clipping the corners. You're going to be able to get this puppy set up and into scenario one the first day of the battle pretty quickly. It's going to be basic command control, which means that you're going to be able to do what you want, essentially, as long as you keep them within radius of the appropriate leader, keep your units within the radius of the appropriate leader, which tends to let you do things that may not be strictly historical. It may let you do too much, but that's okay. Most other games on Gettysburg have that built in. They don't put restrictions in place to slow you down. When I talk about A Most Fearful Sacrifice, I'm going to get into that in a whole lot more detail. But this is going to be a fun game. You can sit down with somebody and play either a scenario, or if you're going to have more time, a full campaign, and enjoy the prospect. Most of these games where they're kind of wide open, you can do what you want. In Gettysburg, they probably tend to conclude maybe about 1 in the afternoon of the second day, because everybody who plays Gettysburg games knows that the key to winning as the South is to attack right at dawn on the second day, and push as hard as you can. And when Longstreet comes, you just feed them in, and you put your head down and capture Cemetery Hill, and that's usually what Confederate players do. And if they capture it, then they usually just stop. They hang on to it and dare the Union to take it back, which they may or may not be able to do. All right, that's my input on an unboxing of Gettysburg, July 1st through 3rd, 1863, from Worthington Old School Games. If you have enjoyed this video and have not already done so, please consider hitting the subscribe button. And if you are already a subscriber, thank you very much for your subscription. I enjoy all your comments. I look at them all and I respond to most. All right, well, that's it for now. This is Paul the Oaken Knight, wishing you all a pleasant evening. Now let's set this thing up and play it.